In this presentation, we're going to discuss immigration fraud indicators. In particular, we're going to focus on green card marriage fraud indicators. These are little telltale signs that pop out to the government agent who's reviewing perhaps an I-130 petition, perhaps the I-485 application, that leads them to believe that perhaps the parties, the husband and the wife, are not telling the entire truth about the relationship. And the danger is that these answers can lead to big complications further down the process. Many individuals feel that filling out immigration forms, like the I-130 petition, is relatively simple. And generally speaking, they're right. Filling out the form is relatively simple. However, the answers are often very complex. Individuals who are immigrating do not see things like an immigration officer because they're involved in a relationship. And what might seem normal to them, because that's their lifestyle, does not seem normal to an officer who takes those answers, simple though they may be, and starts to look at it very carefully and say, wait a minute, there may be a fraud that is being perpetuated upon our agency at this time. And so we're going to take a look at some of these indicators, one by one. Here are the indicators of immigration fraud in marriage-based cases according to USCIS that we're going to discuss today. 1. A short time frame between an immigrant's entry and the marriage. 2. A short time frame between a divorce and a new marriage. 3. The timing of the filing of an I-130 immigrant petition. 4. Children born during the marriage to another person, a non-spouse. 5. An unusual number of children and a large discrepancy in age between the parties. 6. Low employment or financial status of the petitioner. 7. Unusual cultural differences. We're going to take a look at each of these indicators one by one and explore why and how these factors become suspicions of potential marriage fraud. Okay, so let's get started. But before we jump in, let me just state a few points here. First, what we're going to discuss are indicators of fraud. They're not conclusive proof of fraud, but they are facts that will make the government look very closely at your application and petition. And therefore, if you're worried about how to answer these questions, you really should consult a professional to help you with developing your case. Secondly, I'm providing these pointers for legitimate marriages. If you're watching this video hoping to perpetuate a fraud, personally, I hope you lose. I hope you fail, because it's those who commit immigration fraud that are making the task of comprehensive and compassionate immigration reform for the thousands and millions of immigrants who deserve it nearly impossible in this country. Until people stop committing shams and stop committing scams and trying to get away with circumventing the rules, we're probably not going to get a very comprehensive immigration reform passed in this country. So I hope you lose. But that doesn't mean you don't deserve to live here in the United States. It means you need to do it lawfully. You need to do it legally. And so you should consult, again, with an immigration professional to make sure that you're doing things correctly and that you don't try to skip the rules. And as you'll see as I go through these indicators, if you're trying to commit immigration fraud, your chances of success are almost null and void, almost no chance at all. So let's move on. The first point is a short time frame between an immigrant's entry and the date of their marriage. And there's two situations. First, there's those who come in the United States lawfully with a visa, temporarily to visit. In some cases, immigrants come in and they leave, and they come in and they leave, and they're visiting someone that they really are infatuated with. Maybe unofficial fiance. And then at some point in time, they make the decision to come in hoping to be married or planning to be married. Well, that's visa fraud. You can't come in as a visitor planning to get married and living here. You can get married, but you're going to have to go back out and finish the immigration process. If you're going to stay here, you're committing visa fraud. That's one type of short time period issue that the government will be looking at. The second one is someone that comes in lawfully or unlawfully, and a short time after they come in, they get married. Maybe they barely meet a person through a cousin, through a friend, through an aunt, through an uncle. And then the two of them concoct some device and they decide, hey, let's immigrate you. I'll pay you. That's fraud. That's immigration fraud. And that's why the short time frame between the person's entry and their marriage is looked at very closely by immigration officials. And that is something, as I noted, I do not condone. You should not be doing that. Do it lawfully, do it legitimately. Two, the second indicator that you should be aware of is a short time period between a divorce and a new marriage. For instance, a United States citizen who marries an immigrant, then they get divorced, and quickly after the divorce seeks to immigrate another immigrant. That's going to cause suspicion in the mind of the USCIS officer, especially if there was a prior relationship that the two individuals knew each other even before the petitioner, the United States citizen, married the first spouse. It may be the fact that the petitioner and the spouse, the first spouse, had some scheme, again, to try to outwit the government, which in most cases isn't going to work. But that's why they're going to look at that short time frame. A second situation, which I believe occurs more often, is a United States citizen immigrates an immigrant, they get divorced, and then the immigrant turns around real quickly and tries to immigrate a new spouse. Now, that situation, again, is going to be looked at very carefully, because who is that second spouse? Did the immigrant know that second spouse prior to becoming a lawful permanent resident? Or even after that immigrant became a lawful permanent resident, how did that relationship develop that she went ahead and filed so quickly? It could be a he or she went ahead and filed so quickly for the second spouse. It's going to cause the government to look very carefully at the I-130 petition and at the I-485 application. About 10 years ago, I helped immigrate a couple. The husband was from Cuba, and he had entered years before under the Cuban Adjustment Act, a very lenient immigration program. He met a woman from another country. He was able to immigrate her under the provisions of the Cuban Adjustment Act, which are very lenient, even though she was from another country, as an after-acquired spouse. About a year later, she came into my office, said she was divorced, and wanted to immigrate her new spouse. When I started to question her, I sensed a lot of inconsistencies. I sensed a lot of insincerity. She had known this person. As she said, she had dated this person before she had married her first husband, the individual from Cuba. I was not thrilled with her answers, to say the least. I suspected she was trying to circumvent the immigration process. I declined her case. I don't know what occurred afterwards, if she went forward or not. I don't know if she was caught in a fraud. I don't know if that was even a legitimate marriage, remarriage. Maybe it was. But her answers seemed so vague that in my mind, she was trying to perpetuate a fraud. Third, the timing of the filing of the petition for a marriage-based green card. The government sometimes considers when a petition is filed as a possible indicator of immigration fraud. Why? Because there's an immigration event that's usually occurring afterwards, and perhaps in their mind, the immigrant is trying to avoid potential negative consequences. For instance, I had a client once, a female who had been placed in immigration proceedings. She had been detained by ICE and placed in immigration court proceedings. Then she and her husband decided to get married. The judge took a very strong look at that case and wasn't convinced. At that time, they sought our assistance. What I found out when I interviewed the individuals is that they had been a couple for over 13 years. They had met as sophomores in high school and started dating soon afterwards. They had been they had been living together 10 years, but they never married. They had 3 children. Convincing the judge that that wasn't an immigration fraud was not that difficult, given the facts of their case. But oftentimes, that's the type of situation that leads to suspicions by the government. It's like, oh, now you're going to immigration court. Now you're filing papers. So be careful as to when you're filing if you are, in fact, trying to beat a certain deadline. It's only fraud if the purpose of the relationship is fraudulent. And that, of course, is a no-no. Fourth, children born to a non-spouse during the marriage. I had an individual who contacted me just a few weeks ago with that situation. He was immigrated by a United States citizen. She lived in the United States. He lived abroad. They were going through the consular processing mechanism, and that took a few years. While he was abroad, he had a relationship with another woman. That woman became pregnant. However, at the time of his interview at the embassy, she had not yet delivered that child. That child was not yet born. And so the issue of the child being born to a non-spouse was a non-issue at that time. In many cases, had the child been born, then that would have been a suspicion of marriage fraud. But the individual, once he came to the United States, found out the woman had a child, confessed this to his wife, and they worked things out, and they lived together for about 4 years before they ultimately sought a divorce. Years later, that individual tried to become a U.S. citizen, and at the naturalization appointment, they denied him on the basis that he lacked good moral character because of that act while he was married with another woman. And that's why he had contacted my office. In many situations, if that child had been born and prior to him winning a green card, he may never obtain permanent residency in the first place. The next indicator of fraud that we're going to discuss is, according to the USCIS checklist, an unusual number of children and a large discrepancy in ages between the parties. Now, the next set of indicators I'm going to discuss, I have serious interpretation problems with them. For instance, what's an unusual number of children? Is it a number above the national average of 2.5 children per U.S. family? Is that a factor? If someone has 3 children, 4 children, 5 children, that's a factor? Well, according to USCIS, it is an indicator, perhaps, of immigration fraud and a large discrepancy in age. What does that mean? What's a large discrepancy in age? Is it a 5-year differential, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years? What is a large discrepancy in age? Be that as it may, these are factors of potential fraud that the government considers when they're looking at the applications and petitions of immigrants seeking benefits. Let's take this example. A young woman in her mid-20s owns a moderate-sized restaurant. It doesn't give her a large income, it gives her a dependable income. She's divorced. She has 3 children. She meets an individual that's 15 years older than her. Does that lead to a suspicion of immigration fraud? Is that the type of indicator of facts? Are those the type of indicators that the government is going to explore in greater depth? Another indicator number 6, is a low employment or financial status of a petitioner. What's the purpose of this indicator? Well, the implication is that if a petitioner has a low-paying job or has a spotty employment history, that they're more likely to be a person, a United States citizen, who is going to marry someone from another country for financial reasons, not because of a real marriage. That's the suspicion. And really, there are not many cases of immigration fraud that way that's been reported. There's one really famous case out of the East Coast, the Barrientos case from about 10 years ago, where a United States citizen married not 1, not 2, not 3, but 10 immigrants. She was clearly in the livelihood of making money from sponsoring immigrants for green card benefits. Surprisingly, she didn't get caught until the 10th marriage. Most likely, she didn't post accurate information in all her applications and petitions, and she may have even somehow played with the names and other factors, so that she went undetected for so long. Eventually, she got caught, and she got in trouble, and all the immigrants got deported. Now, here's a very important point to understand. When multiple indicators are present in a case, USCIS suspicions increase. So putting those 3 sort of vague indicators together, an unusual number of children, a large discrepancy in age, low employment or financial status of a petitioner, you combine those, and the government is definitely going to take a close look at the petition. Let's return for a moment to the woman with the small restaurant. Would it be more suspicious if, let's say, the owner was in her mid-40s and she met a younger fellow, say 25 years old? Her situation was the same. Owner of a moderate restaurant, dependable income, and the fellow was 15 years younger than her. What if that fellow came from a well-to-do family? Would that cause more suspicion? What if the fellow had a dependable income? He was a lawyer or an accountant in his home country. What if the male was not well off and just was a normal male? Would that be more or less suspicious than the male with a lot of income? What if the couple the petitioner and the beneficiary were involved in a same-sex marriage, and they had a large discrepancy in age and a large differential in their income, in their earnings, would that make that case more or less suspicious? The last indicator that we're going to discuss today is what the government calls unusual cultural differences. And I have a lot of problems with that for the simple reason that, by definition, cultural differences lead to unusual bonds between individuals. It's a definitional issue. Now, if the couple cannot communicate, if there's such strong language differences that neither one knows the other's language, well, I think you have a real problem there. That's a real strong indicator of fraud. However, that's an issue that usually won't be discerned until the time of the actual interview. Religious differences, I've seen many couples from different religions marry and live a long and fruitful life together. Usually they just reach an understanding, maybe a midpoint in their life. Maybe one party converts to the other's religion. But that usually isn't an issue. Where it really becomes an issue, I believe, is again in combination with the last set of factors. The age discrepancy, the difference in family size that they're bringing into the relationship, the relative incomes of the parties. You add all that to cultural differences, and you're going to have definitely a matter that the government is going to take a close look at because of the potential for immigration fraud. So even though these are all simple answers on their own, combined, they can lead to some serious questions by the government whether or not your relationship is legitimate. And you could receive a request for evidence. You could be told to attend a second interview where you're separated from your spouse and you're asked questions separately. You could eventually be denied. That is why I say all the time that when individuals are preparing to file a petition or an application and they're doing it on their own, or the person's helping them, do not spot such issues. They do not question issues like that. You have to be alert to make them spot them so that they can explain and make sure that you have adequate evidence to survive the immigration officer's questions. Otherwise, you may be forced into a position where you're fighting an appeal because you've been denied, or you're just outright denied and referred to immigration court. Those are really tough situations. But if you take these indicators to heart and you say, wait, we have some of those in our situation, then you're not going to need to rely on those persons helping you to spot those for you because you spotted them yourself. And you're going to know that you need to provide adequate evidence for them. With that, I wish you all the luck in the world. Thanks for watching. Know someone who might be interested in this video? Then please take a moment to like and share it with them. Also, if you would like more videos on immigration, just click on the subscribe button. And here's a little bonus, a short guide that you can download for free by clicking on the link on the description box or the square-shaped image. Plus, if you have ideas for videos you'd like to see, write a short comment below or feel free to contact me at carlos@VitaraImmigrationLaw.com. My name is Carlos Vitara. I appreciate your time and hopefully we'll be talking again very, very soon.